So, welcome everyone. Good evening from all parts of the world and the US. My name is Monique Inge, and I have been Ron's business and operations manager for more years than I can count now. And he'll get a little bit into the story of how we met many years ago. But it's been such an honor to work with him and support him in this body of work for probably like the last 10 years. And particularly with including this Saga of Grace series. So, on behalf of myself and the many others who are also part of Ron's network and support team, I want to welcome you to what we have called a conversation with author Ronald Chapman, Gratitude, Grace, and Transformation, a virtual celebration of his newest release, The Reckoning of Grace. So before I turn things over to Ron, I just want to do a few quick notes, housekeeping things, just to kind of help us create this space of connection, but also presence tonight. Ron is going to invite you all to turn on your video if you're comfortable to do so. It means a great deal to him for us to be able to see your faces and just connect and share this experience together. We're also going to ask you to remain mute unless you're speaking. So I'll be monitoring the chat throughout. So if there are questions, if you have issues with anything, just feel free to put it in the chat. I'll be watching it in real time. Going back to the questions, if questions come up throughout and you just want to drop it in the chat for us to come back to it later, I'll be watching for those too. So don't worry about it. And then just lastly, we're going to record this session and we're also going to post it onto Ron's website. We want to be able to share and show everyone what they're missing out on, for one, but also what else is to come and what this book and this series is about. So I am going to now do the official introduction of Ron before I hand it over to him. So for more than 35 years, Ron has served as an internationally accredited workshop leader, facilitator, and motivational speaker. Through his Seeing True practice and his progressive recovery approach, Ron has helped countless people deepen their awareness and embrace the lifelong journey of healing and transformation. His work explores how spirituality moves in and through our lives and how that movement can ultimately transform us. The Saga of Grace series, though fictional, serves as a spiritual allegory that mirrors the personal and collective possibilities of transformation. Ron is the author of 7 books, including all 3 of the current books that are comprised of the Saga of Grace series, which are A Killer's Grace, The Dark Side of Grace, and The Reckoning of Grace. He's also written several nonfiction works on recovery, meditation, and contemplation. So as Ron speaks tonight, please feel free again to drop your questions into the chat. We'll bring them back up and address them during the Q&A session or at other parts throughout the night. But now I am going to turn it over and welcome Ron.
Thank you, Monique. Yeah, so those of you who are listening to that who've known me for a long period of time probably said to yourselves, I got the real dirt on this guy. He's not that good. So it's like, there you go. So just a quick thing. Monique supported me in some work I did at the Centers for Disease Control a number of years ago. And she was the best I've ever seen. And I said, if you ever go off on your own, I will be your first customer. And sure enough, she went off on her own. I helped her design her business. We figured out she's as brilliant as I remembered, and she's been supporting me for about a decade now, which is, we actually call her my handler, which you can laugh about because I need handling. So, Monique, thank you. So
Welcome.
I want to start by blowing up an idea just right off the bat. As I talk about this idea of grace, it's like everybody thinks it's like, daisies, rainbows, and unicorns. It's like, oh, grace is such a wonderful thing. And it's like, in fact, one of the minister friends that I have here said, this ain't your mama's grace, Ron. And I said, well, yeah, I know that. So let me tell you a quick story. This was actually in A Killer's Grace, but it's a true story. And the story was on Lake Erie when some guys went out, they got drunk, and they rode their wave runners out into the lake and ran out of gas, and they got real sober because they were in the water overnight. And the next morning, amazingly enough, a Coast Guard cutter happened to see them in the rising sun, which is just remarkable, miraculous. And they were interviewed afterwards, and somebody said, oh, well, God sure was with us when you got discovered. And there was a Jesuit priest there who said, oh, rest assured, God was with you when you got drunk and took those wave runners out into the lake. And that's the reality of how I think about this. Gnarly grace, I sometimes call it. Arlo Guthrie said, you can't have a light without a dark to stick it in. But we like to focus on the warm, fuzzy, beautiful parts of it. And in fact, some of this where it gets really personal, and those of you who know me really well know that I'm a longtime recovering alcoholic. And one of the things in the recovering world and with my own story is there is no doubt that oftentimes what we might call grace is preceded by some kind of terrible breakdown, some kind of difficulty, some kind of tragedy, and then suddenly something is transformed as a result. So, this whole idea of hitting rock bottom, this whole idea of descent preceding ascent, but we only like to talk about the pleasant part. One of the things we joke about in Toastmasters, one of the worlds I play in, is how nobody ever went to hear a motivational speaker who said, "Yeah, I didn't have any challenges, like smooth sailing. I've had an easy life." It's like that is just not what anybody wants to hear because it's not real for any of us. So, with that, let me give you a quick frame of this saga of grace. A Killer's Grace, which was originally written, boy, almost, wow, 20 years ago almost now, came about as a result of a correspondence I had with a serial killer. He was put to death, but before he was put to death, he gave me permission to use any of his materials, any of his story, as long as I never credited him. He didn't want any harm to come. So it took me a few years to figure out how to write that story. And for me, A Killer's Grace is about addiction, it's about trauma, it's about breakdown, it's about darkness. But ultimately, it's about healing. When I finished A Killer's Grace, and a couple of you know this, so you're going to laugh along with me, the first reviewer said it was a work of art that I'd created a new genre, the psycho-spiritual thriller, which of course my ego kind of lights up at that. It's like, I got my own genre here. But then he said, I cannot wait for the sequel. And I said to myself, oh, I didn't know there was a sequel. And the result of that was that for about 10 years, I had to really try and figure out how to work with that. And one of you here tonight in this session actually helped me with thinking through that plot and so forth. But I tell you, once the dark side of grace, which is about post-traumatic growth, and if you don't know what that is, there's this basic idea that there can be a breakdown and you may go to the dark side or you might go to the light side. And so in the dark side of grace, I explore how it is that you could take someone from similar setting, in fact, half sister and half brother, and one could go to the light and one could go to the dark, because it's a really profound concept that we don't necessarily understand. And then that set up this new book, The Reckoning of Grace, which I feel is about transcendence. How do we rise above this whole mess that we have here? And throughout this all, I have a protagonist, Kevin Pitcairn, known as Pitcairn, and his beloved Maria Elena, who he calls Emmy. She calls him Cito, Kevin Cito, little Kevin from his childhood. And this is actually a reflection of their growth from trauma through post-traumatic growth into this spiritual transcendence. And there is a fourth book that is coming, tentatively titled, or probably definitely titled, Great. We bought the website, so I guess we have to keep Grace Resurrected. The fourth book is Grace Resurrected. It's about the ultimate transformation, and it's going to be set 25 to 30 years in the future. So I've reached a conclusive point in The Reckoning of Grace, and I'm going to take those characters forward because the trajectory has been laid for me to reimagine the future. And I'll say a little bit about that tonight. Some of you have talked with this a little bit about, because I imagine a very optimistic, transformed future for individuals and us collectively. But we'll get to that. So the other thing, and Monique mentioned this, is, in a strange way, this is semi-autobiographical. I didn't kill anyone. I'm not a serial killer. What I am is a product of this spiritual trajectory from breakdown through some kind of a remarkable inner change, psychic change, to some kind of a transformation in my life. And the truth of the matter is, I'm writing the fourth book as the transcendence or ultimate transformation is unfolding in my own life. I once interviewed, I used to do radio interview work on public radio, and I interviewed an author one day, and he said, Ron, let's be honest, we all just write biography. I can't write from anybody else's viewpoint except my own. So ultimately, it is a reflection on me and my my girlfriend, now fiance. That's a whole nother story. She she has been reading these books over and over again, trying to figure out which part is fiction and which part is nonfiction, and it leads to some really fun conversations. So when we weave this in, there's an idea in tonight's title which is really important because we included grace and gratitude. 'Tis the season of Thanksgiving and all that. Uh, I want to say this. There's this great simple item from the scriptures: in all things give thanks. And this is really represented in this third book, and it's really integral to this. Again, so here's the test I use. I'm just going to be really honest. When I show up in faith communities of any kind, I want to see if they pray for those people they hate. I want to see if they pray for the people who have violated us. And most often you don't hear that. But it's very clear that gratitude and grace extend in all directions. And so, in all things, give thanks, which is represented in this book, The Reckoning of Grace, is this profound idea that if all you're doing is thanking the heavens, thanking higher power for the good stuff that befalls you, as one of my mentors said, well, what good is it if it only feels good to you? Why would you only express gratitude for that which is warm and fuzzy? Which, I mean, the truth of the matter is, as I see it today, this whole idea of grace, that the day we are living, the life each of you woke up with, the life I am living is manna from heaven. It descends every day. I'm living heaven on earth every day. It just doesn't look like what I ever expected. And so now it begins to open up this space. And the serial killer taught me part of this in our correspondence. That even, and there's a line in the Reckoning of Grace, this latest book, that it's repeated 3 times. We must offer thanks and gratitude not just for the killers, but for the killing. Now, that is a really tough dose to swallow. I had a woman come to a book event in Santa Fe a couple of years ago, and she came because her sister had been murdered brutally. And she had been actually visiting the killer in the prison and trying to understand. And she said, Ron, I understand why he did what he did. It makes sense. But I can't, the wound is so deep, I cannot discover how to forgive him. And so that was the conversation we had about how you forgive the unforgivable. One of the folks I interviewed on the progressive recovery site was a woman who had been drunk and killed a family driving drunk one night. And the whole interview is about how you can forgive yourself for unforgivable behavior, knowing that those people will never be brought back, that you cannot make it right. And yet, somehow or another, she speaks so gracefully about what it has taught her and the person she has become as a result of that terrible, terrible circumstance, which we wouldn't wish on anyone. So there's this whole different idea. Part of this is mirrored in things like Pema Chodron, the great current day Buddhist teacher, who urges us to lean into the sharp points, that it's these ugly, difficult things that can teach us so much. By the way, Jesus did say something about how we really ought to try and pray for those people that we think are our enemies, right? It's like praying for your friends is a piece of cake. Trying to figure out what to do with the enemies is another. And then I had a friend in recovery, Jim P., who would say this. Jim looked just like Colonel Harlan Sanders, and he had this gravelly voice. The the KFC guy. If you don't know, that's Kentucky Fried Chicken. And he would say, "Cuddle up to your fears and your pains. Make friends with them. See what they can teach you." So again, there's this whole contrary idea of the darkness, the difficulty, the pain, that's the point. That's the point at which we can learn the most. So there's some really provocative research that came out, I think I saw it 3 years ago, that suggests that the amount of learning from our failings and our breakdowns is 100 times the learning from our successes. Imagine that. 100 times benefit from the things that represent breakdowns rather than our successes. And yet we spend all of our time thinking about our successes when we are blessed, as they like to say. So my analogy for that puts it in the real world is if you watch how a little kid learns how to, an infant, a toddler learns how to walk, thousands of fails up until the moment that suddenly, they walk. And we cheer them at every single vantage point. We don't say, "Oh, you fell down again, you little idiot." We're like, "Oh, yay, you tried again, try it another time." And we kiss their boo-boos and all that stuff. So there's this real conflict in the world we live in where we only want to look at the light stuff, not understanding that the dark stuff is just as important as the light stuff. Because if you want to go Eastern, it's the yin and the yang. You can't separate the two. And in fact, one other provocative thought is the Tibetans, the ancient Tibetan wisdom believes that creation begins with the decay of the fall season. It's completely contrary to the West, where we believe it's like, oh, look, here come the narcissus. Spring is here. There's life. It's like, no, they believe the life began with all of the decay and the destruction in the fall. So all these things that I do are trying to get us to look differently. And the reason for that, and I'll tell a story about this before all is done and said, um, what I have seen is just how much fruit is born in those dark and difficult places that we want to avoid. So let me just read a little bit from the book, just a couple of passages, because I really want to get to chatting a little bit about these provocative ideas and the vantage point of getting to transcendence where we can rise above these things and view them with a kind of objective awareness of going, oh, I see why it's that way. I see why it had to produce that, which is a fairly elevated point of view for a lot of these things. The book opens with sort of an omniscient view, which I'm not going to read. But for those of you who've been following the books, you know that I like to drop the omniscient viewpoint in really that idea of if you've seen the movie Wings of Desire by Wim Wenders, the German version, it was remade into City of Angels. There's this idea that there's this omniscient, non-judgmental view being descended upon us at all times. That it has no judgments. It's just watching. It's just paying attention. It's sort of an angelic point of view. So I try and capture that here and there to sort of take it into the story and then back out of the story. So I set up an omniscient setting. And then because this is contemporary times, the opening paragraphs I do want to read. Amid a dramatic increase in vitriol and violence, the presidential election of Donald Trump in 2024 was devastating to many. Indeed, it would set the scene for a terrible descent on the way to what would become a societal rock bottom. Many ordinary and not so ordinary people would be singled out for retribution, not just by those in elected office, but also those enabled by the not so subtle violence they advocated. Countless people who had been labeled as other would be tragically affected, whether in the vast sweeps of immigrants held in detention camps, the reversion of rights for those in the margins, as well as those not so marginalized, or the increase in right-wing mobs claiming mandates to harm those with differing beliefs. But a rising up of ordinary women and men, loosely organized into a movement, provided a perfect counterbalance. What some would come to call a great spiritual transformation would emerge amid the cultural wastelands. Behind the veils of the world, small groups of devoted spiritual practitioners continued to practice, adding psychic fuel to the entirety. They would come to be known as a new generation of desert mothers and fathers. So this group of people who are rising up, it actually is foreshadowed in A Killer's Grace with what in there is the crucifix protests, which is a central piece of the plot where inverted crucifixes are used to signal cultural distress. And it becomes a central piece to what arises. In the reckoning, in the dark side of grace, part of this emergence is called the watching. where groups of people just observe the violence and bring essentially awareness to these violent activities. And it's remarkably powerful. These come together in the third book, The Reckoning of Grace, with a plot twist or two that I'm not going to say anything about because I don't want to ruin the plot. But I will tell you that Killer's Grace took place largely in New Mexico. The large part of the plot in The Dark Side of Grace took place in southern Appalachia. And this book ends up significantly taking place in southern Arizona in the Chiricahua Mountains. And then there are two seminal pieces of the plot that take place here in Atlanta, one on Stone Mountain and one at Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial Historical Site. So the scene is set. And by the way, just for the record, I now have three complaints with the FBI because in response to that opening about Donald Trump, I received three significant online threats from people who were pretty offended by the fact that I said what I said. So I've been urged to be mindful of these things. We think they were just cranks, but nevertheless, somebody told me, they said, "Well, that means you've written a good book, Ron, but you're pissing people off." So here's how this story starts. If it's true that we have to include the ugly, then oftentimes I use something ugly to set up the course of events. So here's how the book opens. By the way, in the first book, I introduce a place called the community of the blessed or the community of the beloved, and it's actually informed by a real place where priests are rehabilitated in northern New Mexico. Although I've relocated it for purposes of the plot. And so this takes place at that location. Brother Samuel gave his life for Pitcairn and Maria Elena that day as he crumpled to the earth. A large caliber bullet had ripped through his neck, draining life through severed arteries. One moment he had been tending to his herd, proudly introducing each goat by name. Moments later, he was dead after stepping between his two visitors and a barrel-shaped man in camouflage gear who had stormed over a brush-shrouded hill with automatic weapon in hand, intent on killing Pitcairn and Maria Elena for trying to destroy his world. Beneath the massive blood-red slabs of sandstone split by dark, beautiful rifts in the rock, the devoted brother had rushed toward the gunman. He managed to grasp the man in the final act of his life and tumble with him to the ground. Two other members of the community of the blessed rushed forward and subdued the violent man. Almost immediately, the goats encircled their fallen, lifeless shepherd. Beside him, Maria Elena wept. Pitcairn stood in a devastated reverie beneath the towering beauty that surrounded them. As a man who vacillated between agnosticism and atheism, there was nevertheless the power of a deep, incomprehensible stillness. He ended up writing about this in a fictional newspaper, the Albuquerque Chronicle, and he talks about how this remarkably pastoral scene was contrasted with this remarkably violent act. And then, because he's a journalist, I want to read this because this kind of frames how he is seeing this and how the plot transpires. Um, and this is him writing a real editorial that appears in the newspaper. As a journalist and social commentator, I'm often asked what it might take to reach a tipping point, a notion framed by author Malcolm Gladwell that signifies the moment when cultural tides turn. As a recovering alcoholic who has seen the extraordinary transformational power of hitting bottom, I must admit that sometimes it takes terrible destruction, pain, and suffering to galvanize a new direction. In that sense, all this awful and ugly reality we're experiencing is actually a great gift. It is through that collective rock bottom that enough voices will rise to turn the tide. Beauty and transformation live within the vortex of violence, though the cost is distressingly great. There's another profound concept I've come to love, Stockdale's paradox, named after Admiral James Stockdale, a senior naval officer who was a prisoner of war during the Vietnam War. Stockdale could not stop wondering what could predict survival under terrible circumstances. Interestingly enough, his conclusion parallels that of the great psychologist Viktor Frankl. We must confront the brutal facts of our reality and, capital A and D, we must maintain optimism. We can and will prevail in spite of that brutal reality. I believe, this is Pitcairn, I believe this is the moral arc of justice of which the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. spoke, though in all truth, it invariably lies on the other side of carnage. So it all sounds very dark, but if you followed Father Richard Rohr, who actually inspires one of the characters here, or any number of mystics, they will tell you, well, even Carl Jung said, the secret is to allow the light to find its way into the darkness. And so much of the work I've done in the world is in dark spaces with difficult circumstances. And so there's a couple of major conclusions here that I want to frame. And by the way, it ends optimistically, and book 4 is incredibly optimistic. Let me tell you first of all what I see happening, then I'll comment on where this is going, and then we'll see if we can chat a little bit about these ideas. First premise is that breakdowns are inevitable. Indeed, they are normal. Everybody gets some problems, people, communities, cultures, you name it. And in this present moment we're in, which is reflected in this book, The Reckoning of Grace, we have all kinds of difficulties that we're facing. I have a theory about that I'll share in a moment, or a hypothesis. And the thing is that the difficulties lead to tipping points. And those tipping points is when paradigms change. There is a principle called post-traumatic growth. It emerges out of difficulty. It's a beautiful, miraculous, amazing thing when you experience it or see it happen. And the punchline, if there is a punchline, is that hurt people will hurt people, healed people will heal people, and transformed people will change the world. That's the trajectory of this. The key here is in us becoming those healed people. So let me just say just a couple things before Monique balloons me, before we watching the time here. I think where we're at, here's my little political, well, socio-political observations. I really believe what's happening in the world that I'm setting up here is we've exhausted a way of being. It's often labeled a patriarchy, right? It tends to be authoritarian. It tends to be tops down, hierarchic. And it looks to me, and the proposition in the book is that it's run its course and it just can't work anymore. And the underlying social theory is that the world has become too diverse, too complex, too intermingled for that model to work anymore. So the cultural tipping point I'm foreshadowing here, I think, is really what's happening in the world. And I introduce in the book, a couple of you know this. I introduce deep in the Jungian Carl Jung's work. There's the idea of the sacred feminine, and that the masculine cannot be healed except with the presence of the sacred feminine. So some part of what's going on is the emergence of a tipping point that produces something different in our culture as we know it. The interesting thing about this, and there was an author, Ann Wilson Schaaf, who wrote a lot about this. She ended up building a system called living in process, is it's not just about male and female. It's a way of seeing and being. It just so happens men tend to be embodying more of the masculine energy, and women tend to be embodying more of the feminine energy. But there are men with strong feminine components, just like there are women with strong masculine components. And part of the suggestion here is we need the emergence of what is actually referred to as the Black Madonna, that there's a spiritual presence that is needed to help push us over the edge. But there's still no escaping the difficulty. The question I always get asked is, well, dear God, Ron, how bad has it got to get? And the answer about that is, informed by my work in recovery, is we do not know when a bottom comes until the bottom smacks us. And however much suffering is needed to cause people to change their minds is how much suffering is needed. There have been times in the past of humanity where this has been the case. And if you've studied the so-called 80-year cycle, it would suggest that we are upon another one of those jumping off points towards something. last comment on this, and I'd love to know what y'all are thinking about these ideas of grace and the ideas I'm offering. Um, is maybe all the doom saying, all the despairing, all of the looking towards devastating future states, maybe that's nothing but the collective ego scared to death that the game is getting ready to change. Just like every dream where you dream you're dying has nothing to do with physical death, it's the death of some aspect of the ego. Perhaps we are in a period where we are awakening to something and it's scaring the bejesus out of a whole lot of people, causing a whole lot of challenges, difficulties, etc. But I will close with this. When I talk openly about this, as I increasingly seem to do, here's reality. The reality is that international travel is not going away. Diversity is not going away. People's awareness of things spiritual is not going away. Gay folks are not going back in the closet. Women are not going back in the kitchen. Black folks are not going back to the cotton fields. We can't dial it back. The genie does not go back in the bottle. But it all pushes us to some kind of a transition point, a paradigm shift where perhaps we can see the world a little differently. I'm betting we're going to see the world a lot differently because I'm betting on a transformation. There's an ancient Hopi prophecy that refers to this as the fifth world, that there's a moment when the fourth world can no longer hold. Um, Now, I don't know if you believe in Hopi prophecy, but I like to think that they're pointing us, many of the prophets are pointing us towards what the scriptures call a new heaven and a new earth. So I'd love to know what you think about this. Monique, how are we going to have them jump in on this? You want to give a little bit
Yeah.
of guidance for them, and we'll see what we talk about for the next 15 or 20 minutes, if that long.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So first, thanks, Ron, for just for the sharing, for the reading, for the context and setting things up. Before we do jump into the Q&A, I would love to take a group photo of us if everybody is okay with that. I'll just do a quick little screenshot. If we can do
Because
that when we have, oh,
you're so photogenic. We need to capture that.
we have to capture this moment. We can't let this go.
Have
So
you
if
still got
everybody,
have you still got me spotlighted, Monique? Or
no, we should be in gallery now. And
okay?
let me remove that. All right. So if everybody is good with us, oh, looks like we have a new person just joined. That is Marsha Williams. Marsha, we're getting ready to take a quick group photo if you want to join us for it. No pressure, but I will count us down. And if you want to turn your camera on. So countdown. 1, 2, 3. Everybody say cheese. Thank you.
Thank you,
All
Monique. All
right.
right.
So for the Q&A, you are free to post your questions that you have in the chat. You can also unmute. We're a small, intimate group here, so this is always kind of how things go. We'll let it organically unfold. But if you have any questions for Ron, please go ahead. The floor is open. We welcome it. Any reactions, thoughts?
Have you taken any of you're mentioning about the tipping point, and of course the tipping point, the original tipping point book came out decades ago, and the author has now written a sequel to the tipping point. So that I've always found those books very interesting,
Mhm.
and along with kind of analyzing some of the concepts he brings in.
Mhm.
Um, and of course, going from a fatherless to a father viewpoint in between the books and different things. So, how much have those books influenced some of what you are seeing?
A little bit, Anne. Gladwell has, I mean, a number of his books have really been effective in kind of informing this whole worldview. Um, I would say the greater thing that drives this was more recent research. We knew that Darwin said adapting is going to be required of us. The more recent research is cooperation is the ticket to survival, adaptation and cooperation. And so I've been pretty profoundly moved by that idea of cooperation, that moves us forward, which is not part of Gladwell's work that I'm aware of. But I have yet to read his newest book, but I know it's out there. So the stack on my, like yours, the stack on my nightstand is a little ridiculous. So good question though.
Monique, I have a question if you don't mind.
Go right ahead.
So, Ron, I'm wondering, first of all, I'm wondering how to frame this question, so let's see what happens. But I'm wondering how we hold the tension between post-traumatic stress and post-traumatic growth. And what I mean specifically is there's a reason that our minds and our bodies don't want to lean into those pain points. At what point and how do we lean into them without re-traumatizing, without leaning into that so much that it becomes overwhelming both for our psyches and for our bodies?
Yeah. Well, the simple answer, and then I will add to this, Ivilo, the simple answer, and thank you. I appreciate you for, I'm not surprised you would have a question of depth, Ivilo, from all we've talked about. The simple answer is we're going to have to get healed. And there is, for many of us in the West, no healing without engagement of the wounds. We have to find a way to somehow or another process them. I'm going to tell you what the ideal state is, Ivilo, as I understand it, as I've experienced it, as I've learned from others. And it's a state of equipoise. It looks like this, Ivilo. Neither drawn nor repelled. That doesn't mean you don't lean and balance. So let's assume someone comes at you. It's like, give a little. You don't get knocked off balance. In recovery, they call it emotional sobriety. Buddhists might talk about equanimity. It's to do enough healing work to deal with our own stuff, whatever our stuff is, that when something occurs, something comes at us, we're able to hold a center space. Oftentimes, it's associated with being able to use your breath to hold your center. And for those of us who have done a lot of trauma recovery work, that's my story. So breath continues to be one of the most powerful tools I have, Ivilo. I've learned to hold that center, and in the best of all worlds, and we've seen evidence of this where people respond with nonviolence. That satyagraha, that is incredibly powerful. And a step up from that is the ability to let go of things, to forgive, to release, etc., acceptance, all those things. And so a premise in the book is we're going to have to do our individual healing. Father Richard Rohr says that if it has not been healed in you, you are going to act it out upon someone, which is the ripple and cycle of violence. So it's a longer term prospect. But by the way, there are people behind the veils of the world who are doing this kind of work. And sometimes we see it come out into the world. I know, well, there's a few of those people who are reflected in the book. That's informed by some real people I know. Thank you, Avilo.
Question.
Suzanne, do you?
So we have a question in the chat from Suzanne. Ron, can you see that one? You need me
I
to read it off
do.
to you? Yeah.
Suzanne, I don't think we've hit bottom yet. I wonder what it's going to take. In fact, part of the framing for the fourth book, for Grace Resurrected, is I've had to begin imagining what will it take for us to really, really hit bottom. And I think there's some components. I think we need some moral sensibilities violated. I think, unfortunately, it's going to have to touch people where it hurts them, right? It's real easy to take a stance against something, but when it affects your child, your loved one, it brings it home. And I really surmise in this fourth book that something's going to have to do to profoundly affect the deep money. I'm a capitalist. I'm not against capitalism. What I do understand, and the present environment is interesting, there's a lot of challenging things going on, but the big money people are still making big money. They haven't taken a hit yet. If you remember the Great Depression transition, what got everybody's attention was a massive collapse in wealth from people who had wealth, and it did get their attention. So my suspicion is that as long as the big money folks continue to make big money, that it's unlikely to shift. And I actually have a piece of the plot in the fourth book that I've written that I think will illustrate that point well. I'm not as familiar with Nostradamus as I am some of the other prophetic work, and so I believe from a framework called spiral dynamics that essentially that we're on some kind of an evolutionary upward spiral. I believe that says that we are inexorably moving up that spiral towards some kind of a shift. And of course, it's a paradigm shift, so we can't know what it looks like until we've gone through the paradigm shift. What I often get asked, Suzanne, is people will say, well, dear God, what's it going to take? It's like, I don't know. I've been watching alcoholics and addicts do amazing things to try and get themselves to a bottom, and we just don't know what it will take to get our attention. Sadly, it seems to require some pain and suffering. By the way, that's my personal experience. until I suffered enough, I just wasn't going to do anything any different. Thank you for that question, though, Suzanne.
Great question. Ron, we had a question that was actually sent in too that was separate. So the question reads is, when you think about grace this past year, what moments, whether big or small, stand out to you personally?
Well, I got doged in March. The actions of Doge basically eliminated my business. About 80% of my business, 35 different contractual mechanisms from many differences. And I mean, thankfully, I still have a little bit of work I'm doing. But what it did was it transitioned me into a life transition, which also includes I mentioned having a fiance. Her name is Felisa, and she's conducting a Bible study tonight. Otherwise, she would be here. And there would have been no space in my life for her to arrive in my life. And who would have guessed that? It also would not have caused me to go into my own deeper inner work to try and see the way forward now. I believe I'm moving into a next incarnation. You know, there's that line that in order for something new to take root, something old has to die. And that seems to be consistently true. So I think I think I'm being launched into a next incarnation. I have some inklings, but maybe it will show up in book 4.
Never know.
Thanks, Monique.
Never know. Any other questions? We have another one that's sent in, but I want to make sure we give everyone here an opportunity to ask any questions, any thoughts, reflections. Did anything stand out to anyone based on what you've read so far? You know, is there anything related to the theme?
Well, I mean, I love the series and I love the books. Thank you so much for many reasons. I loved what Milo, I think it was Milo, was talking about, this difference, which really, this book was harder to read in some ways. I read it in smaller chunks, but I was changing as I was reading the book from doing some of my own work. And so
Yeah.
I've gone back because I reread the second books, waiting for this one to come out. And I mean, and the notes that I wrote in them, I don't even understand. I'm a completely different person. So the healed people that heal people, I like what you said about individuals needing to do that work. And of course, I'm a school counselor,
Yeah.
Milo, and I've been doing it for a long time, from college to middle school. I'm in middle school now. I keep going down in age. I'm trying to make some sort of difference. And so we're constantly talking about re-traumatizing when somebody comes to tell a story, because oftentimes it happens in school and oftentimes it happens with a teacher or with me, and to have them retell this. in doing this, I've been doing this 30 years in some way or another, but in the last 2.5, I'm so different. And it's almost like a process of these books where
Hmm.
Yeah.
I'm bringing a different presence to, I'm not afraid of their pain anymore. I mean, I've always been good at taking it. I'm an intuitive empath. I never really knew what to do with that energy until recently because I thought I was the one fixing it, right? Because that's my job. That's my ego loves that stuff. But when you were talking about that and tying it with the book is who knew that I was really doing this healing. Ron was a huge catalyst in this. I saw him in a workshop a while back, and it kept me going in a path that led up all these different things. And then in reading the books and listening to what you're saying, I am noticing the children in particular are
Right.
so looking to, they're not as afraid. They label everything and we PTSD this and we trauma this and they label, label, label. But when I
Mhm.
sit with them in presence, they're changing, not because of me. They're more open to it. And so I think they're leading the way for the adults. They want to blame others and all of this kind of stuff, but here they're sitting with a 61-year-old woman, and I should
Yeah.
have nothing in common with them. And
Yeah.
the
That
oldest
is,
one on staff. Yeah.
yeah, that is, Susan, that is, and by the way, I admire what you've done these past few years. I know and see enough of it to say good, well done. When we can hold that space. So one of the teachers said that her frame of reference was the Holy Spirit. And she said, the Holy Spirit does the healing. We merely hold the space for that healing. And so we can't do that if we haven't done our own healing work. We will somehow or another impose ourselves into the process. And so your experience mirrors mine. And a lot of the research we now know about working with anybody who's been traumatized is to just hold the space, let them talk, just be still. But what happens for lots of us, Susan, I'm sure you know this from your experience, is people go into their pain or their difficulty and we start getting triggered, perhaps because of our own. And it can be really hard, going back to Ivilo's question, it can be really hard at times to hold that center. Susan, the thing that has most humbled me when I've debriefed with people from some of the stuff we've done is what they tell me is, and this comes right out of these practices, they say, Ron, I feel like I can tell you what I need to because you do not judge me about anything. I For a guy who was terribly judgmental, that is like that's a miraculous, amazing thing. But I get it. Carl Rogers, the great therapist, modern therapeutic theory, told us if we can hold people in non-judgment, something magical can happen. But I can't hold them in non-judgment when I'm getting triggered, which means I got to do my own healing work. So, Susan, I'd say that you're making great progress. That's all the evidence, and there's probably more work to be done because that's kind of true for all of us all the time, right?
I like the idea of the collective, though. That's what I was never got to you giving
Yeah.
us more information on your vision of this collectiveness as individuals heal, like finding the place, like going. I'd love to find that mountain, by the way, and go meet those people.
Well, the proposition of the book is that there are small groups of people. Think Dark Ages, right? There are small groups of people keeping the lights on. And there's also a premise in here, Susan, that you can't do all healing work is invariably intimate. It's very difficult to hold an awareness like a Dalai Lama who can talk to 5,000 people at the same time. Most all this work seems to have to take place one on one. My longtime sponsor and mentor Sam said it's got to happen eyeball to eyeball. There's just something that has to happen at that level that can't happen in any other way. So I think Kelly, were you trying to ask a question a minute ago?
I wasn't going to ask a question, Ron. You and I talked about this book a
Yeah.
lot.
Yeah.
And um, I have to tell you, as soon as I read the opening, I feared for your life.
Ah,
I
yeah.
did. It's so real. And you know, I appreciate the way you did jump off with it, and I can't wait to read the ending, but I'm not going to jump ahead and look at it. But I just want to say that I honestly feared for you.
Thank you. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I would be lying if I didn't say that it got my attention. That's certainly true. And the warnings I was given are attention getting. At the same time, I'm very aware, Kelly, that somehow or another we have to come out of the shadows. And so while I'm mindful of it, I'm trying to bring this out of the shadows and talk about these things, trying to find ways to talk about it that don't just trigger people because there's so much triggering going on. But I, yeah, thank you. I appreciate the fact that you were concerned about my well-being.
And Monique, I know that you are aware, and that I think it's appropriate. And I hope, I mean, I think that Ron is okay with me mentioning this. This month, this year is Ron's 40th year chip of sobriety. So congratulations. What an incredible achievement that is.
Oh, thank you, Ann. Ann and I go back to McAllister, Oklahoma, where we both grew up there. And so that's sort of interesting how these things span.
Yeah, very different place to grow up, I'll
Yeah.
say. And Ron had told me years ago he remembers me from that age.
Aw.
And I was a goofy little kid then.
Weren't we all?
Yeah. Well, thank you
Kind
for
of
that.
goofy adult too, but that's
See, some
but
things don't change.
Hey, I take
Um,
that as a compliment.
I would too.
Yeah.
yeah. The
Yeah.
the the
And congratulations, Ron, on your engagement.
well, thank you.
Yes.
It's kind of a remarkable thing, I have to say. It was yeah, there's a long story. I should do a Zoom on the love life of Ron. But the truth of the matter is that the 12 steps of recovery have been an integral piece of this because over and over again, the 12 steps keep coming back and saying, no matter what the other people have done, set it aside, come back to your wounds, come back to your healing. And there's a saying in Al Anon, the core of the parallel to AA. Al Anon says, we may not have caused this situation. We clearly cannot cure this situation, but if we are not aware, we will contribute to it, probably in a negative way. So we just can't be a healing agent. We just can't, as long as we're getting dragged in. Oh, I see
Yeah.
Marcia asked a question too. Oh, and Suzanne, thanks for, I'm glad these are things. Suzanne, there's like so many interesting things in the world to learn and talk about.
Yeah.
Um, and then I see Marcia asked, how did you envision the role of grace as a source of courage when adversity intensifies? Oh, my Marcia. It means we're going to have to up our grace game, right? I mentioned Sam, Master Samwise, I sometimes call him. He's passed from the earth now, but I would bring these difficulties to Sam and we'd process them and talk about them and we agree that we wanted to kill someone. And then and then he would say to me, it's like, okay, Ron, what's it going to take to get back on the high road? That's what we did. We did it for 27 years, over and over and over again. What's it going to take to get done with this so you can get back on the high road? Because if you stay on the low road, you're just part of the problem. And after 27 years of repetition, I finally learned a few things. I told him one day, I laughed and said, it's taken me so long. He said, well, Ron, he's a Texas guy. He said, well, Ron, we wouldn't want to rush things now, would we? So 27 years work. I know we're almost
Yeah.
out of time, Monique. Do I have time to tell one story?
You do. You have time to tell one story. We also have one question for
Okay.
you too, as
Yep.
well. So I'll let you tell your story and then I'll ask you the final question and we'll go into the
Oh,
closeout.
should I tell the story first? Or you want to
Well,
ask?
would you like to answer the question? You want
I
to go
have
with the
no
question?
idea. I don't know what the
Well, let's
question.
ask you the question. So this is always a fun one, and it kind of gets the creative juices going. So one of the questions someone has asked Ron during past sessions is, if this were to turn into a movie, who would he see would play the different roles of the different characters?
I hate
And
this. I have
and
finally
listen,
decided. Yeah, I've
yeah,
decided that Matthew McConaughey needs to be Pitcairn. I think
okay.
he's a good Pitcairn, and I probably am going to go with J Lo for Maria Elena,
Hmm.
largely because of how she played things out as the stripper, where
Hmm.
she held a lot of grace. So yeah, there you go. Well, let me tell you this quick
Yeah.
story. Let me tell you how this stuff got anchored. I was when I lived in Albuquerque, I was asked to go to a group home for young men, 13, 14 years old, 15. And they were all there because it was their last stop. They had been perpetrating and had been caught, and they'd been told, you're going to get it right, or you're going to go up to the northern part of the state, and we're going to stick you in the detention center up there. And that's bad stuff. So I'd come up with this really great 90-minute workshop. And I was driving over there, and I was taking it really seriously. And it was in the North Valley of Albuquerque. And I got about 10 blocks away, and I heard a still small voice suggest something different. And I ignored the voice. And about 3 blocks away, the still small voice spoke again. And I heard myself say out loud, I'm not doing that. I'm a workshop leader. I have a good plan. I'm ready to roll. You can hear the ego in that. I got in front of the facility. I put my foot on the pavement, and the voice said, are you here for them, Ron? Or are you here for you? And I said out loud, okay, all right, okay, fine. Now, maybe I was having a mental health break, or maybe I was hearing something really important. So I went in, I threw my entire plan out. We got the kids circled up. They were all Hispanic except for one white kid. And got them all circled up, got them in there. And I looked at them and I said, you have been told that you're bad, that you did wrong, and that you know better. I am here to tell you that I love you and that you are innocent. You're innocent and I love you. You are innocent and I love you. And that was it. That's all I'd been given. 90 minutes of material thrown out, and that was all I had. And I'm standing there hoping to God that something is going to come from this. And a kid opens his mouth, and it always makes me cry. And he starts telling the story of what he did that got him there. And then he starts to cry. I would find out later for the first time. And he begins to tell the story of what happened to him when he was a little boy, and it is awful. And he's sobbing on the floor, and another kid opens his mouth and tells the story. He owned what he did, and then he tells the story of how he was violated as a little kid. And they collapse into a puppy pile. And so it goes around the room. These kids are they are busting open, and all I'm telling them is, you are innocent and I love you. That's it. By now I'm like, I'm in. It's like I'm seeing something transform in front of me. By the time the night is over, the counselors ask me after, what were you doing? It's like, I don't know. I'm just like following the still small voice. Um, I watched what happens when we hold no judgment. I set down my entire professional portfolio, set aside that I'm the workshop leader, planning on lecturing these boys. And all I did was try and love them without condition, just as best as I could. And it was remarkable to watch what happened. I'm just really grateful that I was willing to follow the still small voice. And someday I'd like to track some of those boys down and see what happened with them. So that was towards the end. Killer's Grace was out, and that experience told me that there is something to this idea of unconditionality that is remarkably powerful. But the only way we can do that is we got to get done with our own wounds. We got to get done with our own damage. Else we cannot hold people in that kind of regard. So that's a tall order. Uh, but I'm tickled that you all have been here. My wish for you is to become those healed people. God knows the world needs them. There's a lot of damage being done, a lot of damage that has been done, generational trauma and so forth. And um, somebody once asked me, how do you hold up with all this stuff, Ron? And I said, because every now and then you get to see a miracle. And it's worth the price of admission just to see those things. So I'm going to keep showing up for it. I'm going to write the fourth book because I have a fun story I think I get to tell. And Monique, I'm going to let you wrap us up.
Awesome. Thanks, Ron. And thank you all for joining us tonight too and asking your questions and just being in the space with us and holding space for each other. We're so grateful for you in that regard. So in the chat, I'm dropping a few links if you want to continue to follow this journey, follow Ron's journey, follow us on social media, identify and find his books, visit his website. We are putting the message out there. It's out there. It needs to be told, this story, and to continue pushing forward. So Ron, if you don't have any final words, I will say to you all, thank you again for joining us for this evening of grace and gratitude and transformation and storytelling. And we just wish you well.